Greetings everyone and welcome back. So we're going to get started with our next segment, that is Hidden Revelations. Today we're going to talk about Africa being the Holy Land. I started off last week talking about the concept of what it means to be the Holy Land. Today we're going to talk about Israel. Today's modern state of Israel lies on a territory also known as Palestine. Today, that is regarded as the Holy Land by many, including people on the side of being the Arabs, people on the side of being the Jewish people. Other people around the world regard this particular land as the Holy Land. Now, we're going to talk about geography because Israel has been depicted as being separate and apart from Africa. But is that true, or is that something that has been a manipulation of the media? So let's get started. Check out this map of the globe. These are the regions of the world according to most commonly held definitions or most commonly believed perceptions of the world map. As you see when you zoom into the area known as Africa, Middle East, or Europe, that area is the part of the world we're going to be dealing with today. Now, you see connected to the continent of Africa, and by the way, there's a distinction of North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Well, there's another distinction also of Middle East. All of these distinctions are man-made. That is one thing that I want you to understand. The geography as we know it is something that literally comes out of the imagination of European map creators, the people who draw the borders, European states. All of them have political meanings. So whenever you say this is one continent, this is another continent, this is one country, this is another country, you might be deceived into thinking that these are geographical indicators of some type of separation, but that's just not the case. Historically, these borders have been changed, they've been rearranged, and they are everything that shows them to be arbitrary. Included in the arbitrariness is this region that we know today as the Middle East. Now, you might not know this. This term Middle East is actually a pretty recent invention. So according to World Atlas, the term Middle East originated from the same European perspective that described Eastern Asia as the Far East. The Middle East denotes the transcontinental area between Western Asia and Egypt. It is comprised of 17 nations and an estimated population of 371 million people. Now, going on, it says the origin of the term Middle East is considered to be in the British India Office during the 1850s. That is correct. Prior to the 1850s, this term that we know as Middle East did not exist. It was popularized by Alfred Thayer Mahan, an American naval strategist who was referring to the region between Arabia and India in 1902. Mahan's definition of Middle East was the area around the Persian Gulf. Sir Ignatius Valentine Cherol further enlarged this definition to cater the Asian regions whose territories extended to India. Prior to the Second World War, another term, the Near East, denoted the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. In addition to regions centered around Turkey, the Middle East was used by the British while naming its command in Egypt in the 1930s. It was after this usage that the term became widely used in the West. And then in 1946, the Middle East Institute began operating in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. So that lets you know right there, literally the entire perspective, the entire concept of there being a place called the Middle East that doesn't even come from this region that we know of the Middle East. It doesn't come from this Arabian Peninsula. It doesn't come from that region at all. It actually comes from the West, comes from Europe and the United States, who have been the ones who dictate our language. This is very significant because we have to understand, how do these people see themselves? How does the geography show what this place is? Is this place really its own distinct area of the world, or is this a concept that really plays into the hands of certain individuals? Now, it's important to understand, when people say Middle East, they are talking about the countries Iraq, Iran, Cyprus, Oman, Egypt. That's right. If you accept the definition of, or the perspective of Middle East, you accept that Egypt, which we know is a part of Africa, is a part of the Middle East. Bahrain, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Palestine, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Israel, Syria, Kuwait, and the Jordan. Some countries are occasionally added to the definition, such as Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. Other nations are quoted in the affairs of the Middle East, such as Pakistan, Afghanistan, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. Meaning the term Middle East has been used anytime that it fits a certain narrative. The narrative being these are separate people from the other people in this region, or this is a part of a continent that we're going to make distinct from the rest of the continent. Now, let's go back to where this concept comes from. You should know that the original maps of the world really show three regions, and these are the regions today that we would say are basically Europe, Asia, and Africa. These are the three regions that early ancient people who lived in these regions regarded as being the world. That was their world. Now, as we go on through history, we'll see different ways that these three regions were mapped. So if you look at this first map right here, this is Anaximanders. 610 to 546 BC map. This is one of the first world maps, one of the first maps known to map the world. As you see, you have Europe, Asia, and Libya. The continent of Africa by some was regarded as Libya, or that was the name given to it. Another map shows something similar. Again, you have from Hecataeus map, this is from 550 to 476 BC. You see Europe, you see Asia, you see Libya. And this is another map right here. Eratosthenes, forgive my pronunciation of these ancient names, but you have Europe, Asia, and you have Libya. And this one does make a small distinction when they say Arabia being somewhere in between. Now, notice there's nothing that says Middle East. There's nothing that even says that this is the line that we're going to start to draw. These lines weren't drawn by ancient people. These lines were drawn by people of today. But is it true that this area called the Middle East is something separate and apart from Africa? Would the people indigenous to this region feel like they were separate and apart from Africa? Do they feel like they're inside of their own region that's basically its own part of a continent? Do they feel that way? Well, it's important to also understand that geography tells a different story than what man tells. So I want you to look at this video right now. This video depicts what we know today as Pangea. If you see the world was once together, I think most people agree with that. This is a belief that I also hold. But at some point, different places started to split off. And if you notice, Africa and this place that we know of Arabia basically stayed together until the end. And you'll see that happen right here. So let's play the video again, just in case you didn't catch it. As you see, as the world started separating, going its different ways, you see really almost to the very end, Africa and Arabia are literally connected. They're part of the same region. It really wasn't until the very end that you see there being a separation between Africa and Arabia. And not even a complete separation, because a lot of the separation that exists today is literally man-made. So this is very important to understand, because people who want you to think that Israel or that entire region of Arabia is located inside of Asia, that's the continent it's been labeled or it's been attributed to, the people are frankly lying. As we see, that region separated from Asia, was separated from Asia very early on, and didn't separate from Africa until very recently. That region is what we know as the East African Arabian Africa plate split. So let's talk about it. In East Africa, spreading processes have already torn Saudi Arabia away from the rest of the African continent, forming the Red Sea. The actively splitting African plate and the Arabian plate meet in what geologists call a triple junction, where the Red Sea meets the Gulf of Aden. A new spreading center may be developing under Africa along the East African Rift Zone. When the continental crust stretches beyond its limits, tension cracks begin to appear on the Earth's surface. Magma rises and squeezes through the widening cracks, sometimes to erupt and form volcanoes. The rising magma, whether or not it erupts, puts more pressure on the crust to produce additional fractures and ultimately the rift zone. So do your research. It's clear that the Arabian Plate split from Asia very early on, whereas it just recently is splitting from Africa, whereas it's actually still connected. We should keep that in mind. So the idea that the Arabian Plate should be considered Asia, you should question anyone as of why, and you should also question them as far as them saying it's Asia. Question them as far as at what point did it become Asia, because historically and geographically, it could not have been a part of the Asian continent. But let's go on to another issue. The issue of how do these continents get labeled? Who are the ones who basically decide that this is North America, this is South America, or this is going to be the Middle East, this is going to be Africa, this is going to be Asia? Who decides this? Of course, these are all arbitrary standards created, man-made created. Many of them are going to miss the mark. Many of them are going to not actually capture what it is that Yah created. And a reason that you can actually look to is the tectonic plates that show that the geography does not match the earth and how the earth moves and how the earth separates. Now, you might think tectonic plates are not significant. They actually are significant, not just inside of the continental driftway, but they also are significant as far as nature, and they're significant as far as distinctions between weather, so many ways that they actually do manifest into something real. And it's not just inside of the physical, but it's also inside of the spiritual, I would argue. Now, if you don't believe inside of the reality of tectonic plates, let's just watch this video real quick.
In between two of the islands of Indonesia, there's an ancient line that is both real and not real. You can't see it, but it's there all the same. If you stood on the coast of Bali and looked east to the shores of Lombok, you'd be staring right at the line's narrowest point, a 32-kilometer stretch of water that seems pretty unassuming. This invisible barrier weaves its way through the entire Malay archipelago, their largest collection of islands on the planet. See, on the western side, the animal life is characteristic of Asia, featuring rhinos, elephants, tigers, and woodpeckers, to name a few. But cross the line, and things suddenly change. You won't find those same species on the eastern side. Instead, the islands have a totally different cast of ecological characters, including marsupials, Komodo dragons, cockatoos, and honey.
So there you go. Tectonic plates are not some imaginary or figurative idea. They actually are real and concrete. While man decides to separate the world into these arbitrary borders that are meaningless, Yah has chosen to separate it in his way as far as how he would see that this place is going to be distinct from this place. And nature follows and nature shows. Now, let's go back to the region known as Arabia. As you see, inside of Arabia, which is a part of the African continent. If you look back in history, you'll also find out that the people who originally inhabited this region were black, melanated, or African people. So it's important for us to know that Israel as it exists today would have to be a part of Africa, not just Israel, but the entire Arabian area. Now, even though we went through all of this just to show that modern day Israel is Africa, I'm actually arguing on this channel and inside of this series that the place that we know today as Israel, the place that we call the Holy Land, that is not where the actual Holy Land is located. But for the purposes of this video, it's important for us to know that Israel, that region, the Palestinian struggle for freedom from this apartheid state is very much directly correlated to the African struggle of the entire continent. If you do not make a distinction between North Africa and quote-unquote sub-Saharan Africa as far as being a part of the struggle for liberation, you should also have the same feeling or the same connectedness to that area known as Arabia. But again, as far as the Holy Land, I argue that that is not the Holy Land. And we're going to get into that next week. The real Holy Land, where is it? Where is it located? Next week, we're going to go over a video that's going to explain very clearly, using the scriptures, where the actual Holy Land is located. And then I'm going to go into some other scriptures that really do specifically lay out the exact Holy Land and will explain so much about why this particular region of the world is always under siege. So for now, we'll leave it at that. I will see you all.